The music was a physical thing, a steady thrumming in the floorboards that traveled up through my shoes. The lights weren't just bright, they were sharp little needles of color that stabbed at my eyes every time I turned my head. And the laughter, it came in waves, this constant rolling sound of forced joy that seemed to echo off the high ceiling. You know that specific sound a champagne flute makes when it taps against another, that high clear ping. I must have heard it 100 times. Each one felt like a tiny bell marking another second I had to spend pretending. The craziest part was the world didn't stop. To my left, a group of her university friends burst into laughter at some joke. The band launched into another upbeat song. The disco ball kept turning, scattering its stupid happy dots of light across everyone's faces. But the lights were different now. They weren't festive, they were interrogatory, harsh, and white, like they were there to expose me, to show everyone exactly what I was. The first shift was so small, I almost didn't see it. It was in her smile, a new hesitation, a flicker of something calculated, where there used to be nothing but warmth. She started using his words, phrases I'd never heard from her before. That's not a logical conclusion. Mother, she said that to me over breakfast one morning. She was 12, he always said that that's not a logical conclusion. It was his signature phrase, his way of ending any argument, and now it was hers. The anger was the worst part. It wasn't the normal frustration of a teenager. It was a cold, sharp thing. It would come out of nowhere, triggered by the smallest remark. Asking if she'd finished her homework could lead to a 20-minute tirade about me trying to control her, to stifle her independence. And the things she'd say, they were his opinions, his political rants, his cynical views on people, all coming out of my daughter's mouth. But the delivery was all wrong. It was like listening to a recording. The cadence was hers, but the soul of it, the substance, was all him. I started to feel like I was losing my mind. I'd bring it up carefully, gently. Honey, you seem so angry lately. Is everything okay? And she'd look at me with this blank, dismissive expression. I don't know what you're talking about. You're just being overly sensitive. Dad says you have a tendency to catastrophize. And just like that, the doubt would set in. Was I imagining this? Was I seeing a problem where there wasn't one? Because the divorce was so bitter, I began to question my own memories. I'd replay old conversations in my head, trying to remember if she'd always been this way, if I was just now noticing it. He had a name for it. He called it my hysteria. And through her, he was still doing it. I was being gaslit by my own child. But then I found the drawing. She'd left her sketchbook at my house. After a weekend visit, she'd always drawn happy things, sunsets, animals, fantastical castles. I flipped through it, and my blood ran cold. Page after page of dark, intricate drawings of labyrinths. And in the center of each one, a small stick figure, girl alone. And watching over the labyrinth from the edges, a large looming figure, with a smile that wasn't a smile. It was him. It was all him. This wasn't a mood swing, this was a systematic reprogramming. This was parental alienation, a cold, calculated campaign to erase me and paint himself as the only sane, stable parent in her life. He wasn't just badmouthing me, he was building a new reality for her, brick by brick, and locking her inside it. That was the moment the fog lifted, the doubt vanished, burned away by a cold, clear fury. I was not hysterical, I was not catastrophizing, I was under attack. And so was my daughter. She was a prisoner of war in a conflict she didn't understand. And I had to get her out. To do that, I needed proof, not for a court, not yet for her. I needed something so undeniable, so explicit, that it would shatter the illusion he'd built around her. I had to stop being a victim and start being a detective. My investigation started small. I went through old email chains between him and me, looking for patterns, for the seeds of this. I found them, little comments always framed as concern. She seems anxious after her time with you, she mentioned. You were upset about the divorce. I hope you're getting the help you need. Planting doubts, watering them, letting them grow in her mind. But it was all circumstantial. It was my word against his. I needed the blueprint. I knew he kept a home office, a place he always said was off limits even to her. That's where it would be. After she said it, a strange thing happened to my hearing. It was like someone had stuffed cotton wool in my ears. The sounds of the party became muffled, distant, a dull roar happening in another room. The vibrant colors of the women's dresses, the bright tablecloths, they all blurred into a messy watercolor, painting the only sound that was crystal clear, amplified. Even was the frantic pounding of my own heart against my ribs. It was a deafening drumbeat of panic. Getting into his house was the greatest risk I'd ever taken. I had a key from before for emergencies. I didn't know if he'd changed the locks. I waited for a Tuesday afternoon. He always had a long departmental meeting that ran late. My heart was a hammer in my chest. As I turned the key, the click of the lock was deafening in the silent street. I stepped inside. And the air was different. It smelled like him. His cologne, his coffee. It felt like walking into the lion's den. I went straight for the office. The desk was an old heavy oak thing. I started with the drawers, bank statements, old tax returns, manuals for appliances. Nothing. I felt a surge of panic. What if I was wrong? What if there was nothing here, and I was just proving his point about me? I almost gave up. But then I looked at the desk itself. There was a slight inconsistency in the grain of the wood on one side. I ran my fingers along the edge and felt a tiny, almost imperceptible gap, a hidden fingers trembled as I worked at it. It wasn't meant to be easily found. Finally, with a soft scrape, it slid open. Inside was a simple legal-sized notepad. The cover was blank. I opened it, and the world stopped. It was all there in his precise, meticulous handwriting. It was a log, a journal of manipulation. Dated entries. Objective for today's call reinforced the idea that Mother's emotions are volatile and unpredictable. Strategy: use her love of science to validate my points. Contrast with Mother's emotional thinking. Note: successful implementation of phrase. Logical conclusion: continue usage. It was a step-by-step guide to brainwashing our child. He was designing her thoughts, engineering her reactions. He was playing God with her mind. There were passages where he analyzed her vulnerabilities, her fears, and outlined exactly how to use them to turn her against me. It was the most horrifying thing I had ever read. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely hold my phone. I photographed every page. I made sure the dates were clear, his handwriting unmistakable. The flash seemed blinding in the dim room. I was terrified he would walk in every creak of the house. Was his footstep? I finished, slid the notepad back into its hiding place, closed the drawer, until it was seamless again. I wiped the desk surface with my sleeve. I left the house exactly as I found it, locking the door quietly behind me. I stood on the sidewalk, the bright sunlight feeling obscene, and I threw up in the bushes. I had it, the smoking gun, the undeniable truth. I didn't do anything right away. I waited. I needed the perfect moment. It had to be a time when she was with me, when we had space and time, and when he would be there to face it. I planned it for the next time he came to pick her up. I invited him in, which was unusual. I asked my daughter to sit down in the living room. I could see the confusion on his face, the faintly smug expression that said, he thought I was finally cracking. I was calm, preternaturally calm. The photos were printed out, sitting in a plain folder on the coffee table. He made a joke. What's this, an intervention? He smiled at our daughter, a conspiratorial smile. She gave a little half-smile back. I looked at my daughter. Sweetheart, I know things have been hard. I know you've been feeling a lot of anger towards me, and I think I finally understand why. I opened the folder. I handed her the first page. The top of the page had a date from over a year ago. Objective: fostered distrust. My first thought, my very first instinct, was to get angry, to lash out, to say something like, how dare you speak to me that way, or after everything I've done for you. I could feel the words forming on my tongue, hot and defensive. But that impulse hit a wall made of shame. It wasn't a slow-building feeling, it was a tidal wave. And it crashed over me all at once, drowning the anger instantly. And with the shame came a terrible, dawning clarity. I watched her face as she read her father's handwriting, the words he used to describe her, to describe me, the clinical, cold analysis of how to break our bond. Her brow furrowed. She looked at her dad. What is this? He paled. He actually went white. He reached for the paper. Where did you get that? That's private property. You had no right. His voice was tight, panicked. I handed her another page, and another. I didn't say a word. I just let the evidence speak. She read about her own fears being used as weapons. She read the plans to turn her hobbies and her passions into tools for his campaign. The color drained from her face. Her hands began to shake. His denials became frantic, pathetic. It's out of context. She's twisting it. It's just notes for my book. He blurted out, a desperate, ridiculous lie. But she wasn't listening to him anymore. She was staring at a particular passage where he detailed a conversation they'd had about a fight he had told her one thing. His notes revealed his true intention was the exact opposite. The scale of the deception was finally horribly dawning on her. The entire false reality he had painstakingly built for over 2 years began to fracture. I could see it in her eyes, the confusion, the betrayal, the utter horror. The explosion wasn't loud, it was quiet at first. A single tear traced a path down her cheek. Then her breath hitched, she looked at him. And her voice was a whisper. But it shook with a seismic force. You lied to me about everything, you used me, the dam broke. She didn't scream, she sobbed, great heaving sobs, that seemed to tear themselves from the very core of her. She accused him of stealing her thoughts, of poisoning her memories, of making her hate her own mother. She called him a monster. And he just sat there exposed. His carefully constructed persona in ruins at his feet, he had nothing left to say. The fallout was immediate. She refused to go with him. She ran to her room and locked the door. He left a broken, defeated man. But I felt no triumph, only a profound, aching sorrow for what he had done to her. She stayed with me the first night. She woke up screaming from a nightmare. I held her while she cried, and we just sat there on the floor for hours. Therapy wasn't a suggestion. It was a necessity for her to process the trauma of being manipulated by a parent. She trusted for us to slowly, carefully rebuild a relationship that had been systematically torn down. It was a long road, there were days. She was furious at me for showing her the truth, because the truth was so painful to bear. There were days the old programming would kick in, and she'd parrot one of his phrases, then stop herself horrified. We had to learn to trust each other all over again. It happened in small moments. A shared joke that was ours, not his, a movie night, where we just enjoyed the silence together, her asking me for advice and learning to trust my answer. My mind started flashing pictures at me rapid fire like a slideshow of my failures. I saw myself promising to take her to the zoo on a Saturday, and then finding urgent paperwork to do instead. I saw her at 14, trying to talk to me about a boy at school who was bothering her, and me patting her on the head and saying, "You're a smart girl, y'all figure it out." I saw all the difficult conversations I'd expertly sidestepped, all the emotional landmines I'd tiptoed around. I saw the slow quiet. The resilience of the human spirit is a terrifying and beautiful thing. To see her slowly come back to herself, to reclaim her own thoughts, her own opinions, her own anger, and her own joy. It was the hardest thing I've ever witnessed, and the most glorious. The proof in that desk was a weapon, and I used it. It caused immense short-term pain. But it was the truth, and the truth, no matter how painful, is the only thing that can ever truly set you free. It's the only foundation strong enough to build a real love upon. We're building it one honest day at a time. For 3 years, the empty seat at the dinner table was the loudest thing in the house. I'd set the table for 4 out of habit, and then I'd have to put the 4th plate away. It was a small, sharp pain. I gave myself every single evening. Her birthday would come around, and I'd bake her favorite cake, a carrot cake, with thick cream cheese frosting, and it would just sit there on the counter. The silence from her room down the hall wasn't just an absence of noise, it was a presence. It was heavy like a thick blanket, smothering the whole house. You could hear it in the creaks of the floorboards, a constant reminder of the footsteps that weren't there. My choice, the only one I could live with, was to never close the door, not even a crack. I had to love her from a distance. It was a quiet love, a love with no expectation of a return. It was just there like the sun behind a cloud. You can't feel its warmth directly, but you know it's the only reason there's any light at all. I sent texts on holidays, just a simple thinking of you. They never got a reply. I mailed small gifts for her birthday, and for Christmas a book by an author she used to love, a scarf in her favorite color. They were always returned. The packing slip, untouched, my handwriting on the address label staring back at me. It was a special kind of heartbreak, that return to sender. It was a direct refusal of the love I was trying to send. The internal fight was the hardest part. Bitterness is a tempting companion. It whispers that you're the real victim, that you've done enough, that her anger is an injustice. It's so easy to let that seed grow into a forest of resentment. I had to consciously choose to cut it down every single day. I had to choose hope even when it felt like the most foolish choice in the world. I had to believe that the person I raised, the little girl who used to climb into my bed during a thunderstorm, was still in there somewhere, that the connection we had wasn't completely broken, just buried. The glimmer came on a completely ordinary Tuesday afternoon. My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter, and her name appeared on the screen. I hadn't seen her name on my phone in years. My heart didn't just skip a beat, it felt like it stopped entirely. I picked it up, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped it. Her voice was tentative, thinner. Then I remembered, "Mom, it's me. I was wondering if you had some time to talk." My instinct was to flood her with questions. "Where are you? Are you okay? I've missed you so much." But I swallowed all of that. I knew my need for answers could scare her away. This was about her comfort, not my curiosity. I kept my voice calm, soft. Of course, sweetheart. I always have time for you whenever you're ready. She was quiet for a moment. And then she asked if we could meet just for coffee somewhere public, neutral. I agreed immediately, my mind already racing. Erosion of her trust in me year after year, until the foundation was so weak that this one small stupid comment was all it took for the whole structure to collapse. The coffee shop was a place we'd never been to before. I got there early and chose a table in the corner. I watched the door, my stomach in knots. When she walked in, she looked older, not in a bad way, just more settled into herself. There was a sadness in her eyes that hadn't been there before, a new weight. But she was here, she was really here. We did an awkward dancey, a half hug, a pat on the back. We sat down. And for a few minutes, we just stirred our lattes. The small talk was painful. How's work? It's fine. The weather's been strange. Yeah, it has. The air was thick with everything we weren't saying. Then she looked up from her cup, and her eyes were full of tears. I found something, she said, her voice shaking, when I was cleaning out a closet at my apartment. A box of your old things. I need to talk to you about it. She explained that she'd found a bundle of letters tied with a faded ribbon. They were letters I had written to my own mother years and years ago, when I was about her age, when I had first left home. Letters I had completely forgotten about in them. I was pouring my heart out. I was confessing my own fears about becoming a parent, my worries that I wouldn't be good enough, that I would repeat the mistakes I thought my own mother had made. I was writing about my struggles, my doubts, my moments of pure panic. I was being more honest on those pages than I had ever been able to be face to face with anyone. She looked at me, her face a mess of emotion. I am so sorry, Mom, she whispered. I read them all. And I finally saw you not just as my mom, but as a person who was just as scared and confused as I am now all these years. I was so angry. I thought you were so sure of yourself, that you had all the answers, and were just choosing to withhold them from me. I thought your calmness was a kind of judgment, but you were just figuring it out as you went along, just like I am. My reaction wasn't what I would have expected. There was no triumph in being understood. There was only a profound sorrow for her pain. I reached across the table and took her hand. You have nothing to be sorry for, I said, my own voice, thick with emotion. I am the one who is sorry. I am sorry. I wasn't brave enough to show you that scared person. I thought I had to be a rock for you. I thought showing doubt was a weakness. I built a wall trying to protect you, and I ended up shutting you out. That coffee date turned into a three-hour conversation. We unraveled years of misunderstandings. We talked about specific fights, harsh words spoken on both sides that had festered. We shared memories. But this time we shared our own private perspectives on them. I learned how she had interpreted my actions, so differently from what I had intended. It was painful and beautiful and messy and real. And then finally she stood up and came around the table and wrapped her arms around me. It wasn't a half hug. It was a full, desperate, clinging embrace. We both cried there in the corner of that coffee shop. And I felt the wall between us, the one made of pride and anger and silence, finally crumble into dust. Our bond now is different. It's stronger. Because it's honest. We don't tiptoe around difficult topics anymore. We talk about hard things. We respect each other's journeys. The relationship is no longer just mother and daughter. It's two adults who have seen the worst of each other and have chosen to stay. The pain of those years of estrangement was real, and I wouldn't wish it on anyone, but the redemption, the feeling of winning her back, of earning her trust again, made it worth it. It made me appreciate every. I looked down at my hands. They were trembling. I tried to make a fist to stop it, but they just shook harder. My throat felt tight, constricted, like I was being choked from the inside. I had an almost physical desire to turn and run, to lose myself in the crowd and the noise and never come out. And in that moment, I understood the cruel, intimate truth. Her anger, her sharp, painful words, they weren't really about Italy or honeymoons or building a stable foundation. They were a reflection, a perfect, painful single conversation, every shared laugh, every quiet moment, in a way I never did before. My advice to any parent living in that valley of silence is this: never stop loving, never ever close the door. You can love without imposing, you can hope without demanding. Keep the light on even if it feels like no one is looking for it. The truth has a way of surfacing when you least expect it. Sometimes it surfaces in a box of old letters. Sometimes it's in a quiet conversation. But if you've kept your heart open, you'll be ready to receive it. The other day she came over for dinner. I didn't have to put the fourth plate away. She sat in her seat, and we talked and laughed. and the silence in the house was finally gone, replaced by the sound of her voice. We don't forget the past, we talk about it, sometimes not with anger, but with a kind of reverence for the difficult journey that brought us here. It's a part of our story now, but it no longer controls us. We are together, and we are stronger for having been apart. The family you build, the story you tell yourself about it. It's like a house. You think you know every room, every corner. You know where the floorboards creak and which window lets in the morning light. For 15 years, I lived in a house. I thought I understood. It was a house with a locked door, a room I never went into. But I accepted it. I accepted that my daughter lived on the other side of that door, and that I was the one who had somehow lost the key. That was the surface, the story. Everyone knew the difficult divorce me, the strict one, the one who worried about grades and curfews and responsibility. Him, the fun one, the one with the spontaneous trips and the lenient rules. It was so easy, so convenient to believe that was the reason, that after the divorce, she simply chose the easier path. She was a teenager. After all, what teenager wouldn't choose the parent who demanded less? I learned to wear that explanation like a coat. It was a little tight, it never quite kept out the chill. But it was something when friends asked, when my own family tiptoed around the subject. Id just say, you know how it is after a divorce, she's closer with her father. Id say it with a shrug, a sad smile, performing an acceptance. I didn't truly feel, because underneath it, there was always this nagging sense, this little splinter in my mind. Something didn't fit. The alienation was so absolute, so swift. It wasn't a gradual drifting apart, it was a door slamming shut, and the lock clicking into place, all within a few months. There was a fury in her eyes when she looked at me, then a contempt that felt programmed, like it was based on a story I hadn't been told. I resigned myself to it. I sent the birthday cards she never acknowledged. I left voicemails that went unanswered. I learned to live with the ghost of my daughter, with the echo of what our relationship used to be. I decorated the rest of the house, tried to make a life in the rooms that were still open to me, but that locked door was always there, a constant silent accusation. The discovery happened because of a leak in the attic. A pipe had burst after a heavy rain, and I had to go up there to see the damage. It was a place I avoided, full of his old things, things he'd left behind, and never bothered to collect. There were damp boxes, the smell of wet cardboard, and old memories. I was moving a soaked crate of old books to a drier spot, when I saw it tucked behind it, wrapped in a brittle yellowing plastic bag, was a small metal lockbox. It wasn't ours, I mean it wasn't. Box I recognized from our life together. Mirror held up to show me the accumulation of 1,000 small abandonments, the pain I had caused by my absence, by my emotional distance, and then had the audacity to ignore for years. There was no key, the lock was rusted, but the dampness had warped the metal just enough. I pried it open with a screwdriver, the sound of bending metal echoing in the quiet attic. Inside there were no jewels, no stacks of money, just a bundle of letters tied together with a faded blue ribbon. The paper was thick, expensive stationery, the handwriting was elegant, a woman's hand. But it wasn't mine, and the dates, that was the first cold shock. The dates on the envelopes were from a year before the divorce, before fighting even really started. My hands were trembling as I untied the ribbon. The first letter started with a pet name, a term of endearment. I'd never heard him use. My heart was pounding in my ears. I read on. It was a love letter full of intimate details, plans for a future. It spoke of a trip to Savannah. They'd taken a trip he'd told me was a business conference. It mentioned a fear of being discovered, a hope that soon we won't have to hide. The letters were a chronicle of a full-blown affair, one that had been going on for at least 2 years before our marriage finally fell apart. But it was the last few letters that changed everything. The tone shifted from passion to panic. She wrote about a pregnancy scare. She wrote that she couldn't live a secret life anymore, that she was going to tell me everything if he didn't leave me. And then in the final letter, her ultimatum, she gave him a deadline: 1 month, leave your wife, or I will. The pieces clicked into place, with a sound that was almost physical. The sudden vicious campaign to turn my daughter against me. It hadn't been about the divorce, it was a preemptive strike. He knew this secret was a bomb waiting to go off. He knew that if I ever found out about the affair, especially one that had overlapped with our life for so long, my anger would be justified, my hurt would be legitimate. I would have the moral high ground, so he had to ensure that if the truth ever came out, no one would believe me. He had to make me look unstable, jealous, bitter. He had to poison our daughter's mind against me so thoroughly that anything I said would be dismissed as the ravings of a scorned woman. The estrangement wasn't the cause of our problems. It was a symptom, a calculated, cruel strategy to maintain his lie. I sat there on the dusty attic floor, the letters spread around me like fallen leaves. The vindication was a hot, sharp wave. For 15 years I had blamed myself. I had wondered what I had done wrong, what fatal flaw in me had driven my daughter away. And the whole time it was nothing I had done, it was everything he had hidden. The relief was immediately followed by a deeper, more profound horror. The entire foundation of my life for the past decade and a half was a fabrication. My daughter hadn't rejected me. She had been manipulated into doing, so she had been a pawn in her father's game of self-preservation. Confronting him was unlike anything I had ever experienced. I didn't shout, I didn't cry, I was calm, terrifying, still calm. I went to his house, the letters in my bag. When he opened the door, he had that same slightly patronizing smile he always wore with me now. I didn't step inside, I just held up the bundle. I watched the color drain from his face. It was a complete, utter collapse. There were no denials, no defenses, just a silent, shameful acknowledgement. He tried to say her name, the other woman's. She didn't say anything else, she just looked at me. And for the first time all night, she really saw me. She saw the coward, she saw the fool. And seeing that I finally saw it too, she had nothing left to say. She turned her blue dress swirling around her and she walked away. She moved through the crowd, and people parted for her without even knowing why. Name, but the words caught in his throat. All he could manage was, "You weren't supposed to find those." Telling my daughter was 1,000 times harder. She was an adult, now a woman of 28. I asked her to meet me at a neutral place, a quiet park. She came, her posture guarded, her arms crossed. She was still living in the house he had built for her, the house where I was the villain. I handed her the letters. I said, "Before you decide anything, before you say a word, please read these, then we can talk." I walked away and sat on a bench 100 yards away, giving her space. I watched her from a distance. I saw her frown as she looked at the dates. I saw her body tense. As she began to read, I saw her hand fly to her mouth. She sat down right there on the grass. The moment of realization, when it came, was awful to witness. It was like watching a building collapse in slow motion. Her entire history, her entire understanding of her childhood, was being demolished. Her world was rocked twice. First was the shock of her father's betrayal, not just of me, but of her. He had used her, he had weaponized her love for him against me. The second, deeper shock was the secret itself. The affair, the duplicity that had existed underneath the surface of our family life. For years, the man she idolized, the fun, permissive father, was a man capable of a profound, long-term deception. The aftermath wasn't neat, it wasn't a simple reunion. There was anger, so much anger. But now it had a rightful target. There were tears of grief for the years we had lost. There was a painful, exhausting process of untangling the lies from the truth. Our healing couldn't just be about repairing a mother-daughter bond. It had to be about processing this massive foundational secret that had dictated the course of our lives. We started to talk, really talk, not as a mother and estranged daughter, but as two women who had been wronged by the same person. We had to rewrite our family history from this new, painful but truthful perspective. The focus shifted from Blamitho. There was plenty of Thado understanding. We tried to piece together the timeline, to see the moments of manipulation for what they were. It was like archaeology, brushing away the dirt of lies, to find the shape of what really happened. Building a new foundation was the only way forward. It had to be built on complete, radical honesty. There could be no more locked doors, no more hidden boxes. We had to be brave enough to face the hard, messy truth of our past. The lesson, the one that was etched into my soul, was that secrets are a poison. They don't just hide the truth, they actively rot the structure of a family. From the inside out, the pain of the truth is sharp and clean, like setting a broken bone. It hurts, but it allows for real healing. The pain. A secret is a dull, constant ache, a sickness that you learn to live with until you forget what it feels like to be well. I lost 15 years with my daughter to a secret I didn't even know existed. We will never get that time back. But the house we are building now together has no locked doors. Every room is filled with light. The silence in my car was a physical thing, a heavy blanket smothering the sound of the engine. I was parked across the street from the church, watching people file in. Their clothes were dark splashes against the bright green of the lawn. I could see him standing at the entrance, shaking hands, that familiar, easy smile on his face. My father. And next to him, her arm linked through his, was my daughter. She looked so much like her mother. She was beaming. That was the worst part. She was genuinely, radiantly happy. My hand was on the door handle, the cold metal was a sharp contrast to my sweating palm. All I had to do was push step out walk across that street. And into that church. But my body wouldn't obey. It was 10 years ago. But the memory hit me with the force of a physical blow. It wasn't a scream or a slammed door, it was quieter than that, and so much more final. The space where she had been standing was now a vacuum, a pocket of absolute silence. The muffled party sounds couldn't penetrate it, the music couldn't fill it. It was an emptiness more profound than any noise. I just stood there frozen, a statue of regret, under a glittering disco ball. The lights played over my motionless form, highlighting my stillness amidst all the movement. She was 17, we were in the kitchen, the air was thick with the smell of burnt toast and unspoken arguments. She was leaning against the counter, her arms crossed, looking at a point, somewhere past my shoulder. Her voice was flat, devoid of all the fire I expected. I'm moving in with Dad permanently. He's already packed my things. It was like the floor had vanished. What, sweetheart? Why, we can talk about this, whatever it is. She finally looked at me, and her eyes were empty. There's nothing to talk about. You've never really listened anyway. You're just a monster. You always have to control everything. The word landed like a punch. Monster. It echoed in the silent kitchen. I couldn't speak. I just stood there as she picked up her backpack, walked out the front door, and got into his car. He didn't even look at the house, he just drove away. And I was left alone with that word ringing in my ears. Monster. What did I do? Was I too strict? Did I work too much? Was my love somehow monstrous? The question became a ghost that lived in every room of that empty house. Back in the car outside the church, I watched the last of the guests go inside. The doors closed. I saw my daughter laugh at something my father said, and she leaned her head on his shoulder. For a second, a gesture she hadn't given me in over a decade. I took my hand off the door handle. I started the car and drove away. That was the peak of the pain, the absolute conviction that I was the villain in her story, that I had earned that title. The unraveling began on a Tuesday evening. About 5 years later, the phone rang, and her name flashed on the screen. My heart did a painful, hopeful lurch. We spoke occasionally, stilted conversations about the weather, her job, but this call felt different. Her voice was quiet. Mom, are you home? Can I come over? When she arrived, she looked older, not in a bad way, just settled. There was a new gravity to her. She didn't come inside right away. She stood on the porch, holding a small, worn cardboard box. I was cleaning out Dad's garage. She said, her voice barely above a whisper. After he moved, I found this tucked away behind some old tools. She handed me the box. It was heavy. I carried it inside like it was made of glass, and set it on the coffee table. She sat on the edge of the sofa, not taking off her coat. I read them. I am so sorry, Mom. I am so sorry. I never knew. And in that stillness, the final understanding settled over me. The cowardice wasn't just about the zoo trips I missed, or the conversations I avoided. That was just the symptom. The real cowardice, the deep fundamental flaw, was my refusal to face love honestly. Love isn't just providing a roof and food and tuition. It's showing up for the messy, difficult, uncomfortable parts. It's being brave enough to have the real conversations, to risk anger and disappointment, to be present in the hard truths I had. Inside the box were bundles of letters tied with faded ribbon. My letters, dozens of them, written to her every week for the first 2 years after she left. I'd given up when I never got a single reply. I picked up the first one. My handwriting looked so young, so desperate. I remembered writing it, the tears smudging the ink. I poured my heart out onto those pages. I apologized for things I didn't even understand. I begged for a chance to talk. I told her I loved her more than anything in the world. I looked through them. Every one was there, unopened. He had taken them from the mailbox. He had hidden them. And he had told her I never tried, that I didn't care enough to write, that I had moved on with my life. The understanding didn't come all at once. It was a slow, terrible dawn. It wasn't a shift from blaming myself to blaming him. It was something more complex, more sorrowful. It was a grief for all of it, for the years we lost, for the pain she carried believing her mother had abandoned her, for the pain I carried believing I had driven her away, for the weakness in a man who needed to poison his own child's mind just to feel chosen. She was crying, then silent tears tracing paths down her cheeks. All those years. She said, I thought you hated me for leaving. I thought your silence was a punishment. He made it sound so logical. He said you were cold, that you were controlling, that you saw me as a possession. And I was so angry at you for so long. I thought of all the performances I had witnessed, from afar the graduations. I wasn't invited to the birthdays, Christmases. I saw them all through a new lens. She wasn't a willing participant in my exile. She was a prisoner in a narrative he had built brick by brick, with my unanswered letters as the mortar. The wisdom of hindsight is a bitter medicine. It doesn't erase the pain, but it explains the source of the infection. From this place, 10 years on from that day, in the car, I can see my father not as a victor, but as a deeply insecure man. His charm was his weapon, but it was also his cage. He needed to be the hero, the favorite, and he was willing to burn down our relationship to feel the warmth of that fire. And I see my daughter differently too, not as a traitor, but as a child caught in a crossfire. She couldn't possibly understand. She was trying to survive. She grasped onto the version of reality that offered her the most immediate safety, the most approval. Her anger at me was a shield against a much more terrifying truth, that the parent she adored had orchestrated her heartbreak. Forgiveness wasn't a single event. It was a path we started walking together that night. It was slow. There were stumbles. We had to mourn the lost years. The first time she said, "I wish you could have been there." When I graduated, it was like a fresh wound. But we mourned it together. We acknowledged the emptiness. And in doing that, we began to fill it with something. Our relationship now is quieter. It lacks the easy, taken-for-granted quality it had before the fracture. It's more intentional. We don't let things go unsaid. We are both hyper-aware of the preciousness of time. When we have coffee, we really talk. We listen. There's a gratitude that underpins everything, a silent acknowledgement of the miracle that we found our way back. The lesson in the pain is this: the story you are living is not always the true story. Time has a way of scouring the lies, a way of revealing the bedrock truth underneath. The truth is, I was not a monster. I was a mother who loved her daughter fiercely, but was powerless against a carefully constructed deception. And she was not a daughter who rejected that love. She was a girl who was systematically starved of it, and then told she was the one who had chosen to fast. I was deep in the performance of it all, smiling so wide my cheeks ached, nodding at people whose names I'd already forgotten, making small talk about the catering, the band, the weather. Anything real was strictly off-limits. I was playing the part of the good parent, the proud father at his daughter's engagement party. It was a role I'd rehearsed for years. And tonight, under this glittering sky of a disco ball, I was giving the performance of a lifetime. Every gesture was calculated, every laugh timed. Chosen the easy, quiet path of avoidance, mistaking it for peace, when all along I was building this exact moment. If you are in that place of peak pain, right now, if you're staring at a closed door with a word, like monster, echoing in your mind, please hold on. The full story may not yet be known. The evidence against you might feel overwhelming, but it might be incomplete. The narrative might be controlled by someone who benefits from your villainy. Sometimes being chosen second is not a reflection of your love, it is a consequence of someone else's lie. And lies, no matter how well hidden, are fragile things. They can't withstand the quiet, persistent pressure of time. The truth has a way of finding the light. It might take 10 years, it might come in a cardboard box on a Tuesday night, but it finds its way, and when it does, the healing can finally begin. I looked across the room again. I saw her silhouette framed by the bright lights of the bar. She was talking to her fiancé, and he put his arm around her. She wasn't looking at me anymore. She wasn't an accuser in that moment. She was just a woman, finally free of the burden of my pretense, free enough to have spoken her truth. The music was starting to fade, the party beginning to wind down. The laughter sounded more tired now, and I accepted with a quiet that was deeper than the silence she left behind, that this wound, this raw and painful rupture, might actually be the beginning of something. It was the first honest thing that had passed between us in years, and as much as it hurt, it was real. It was a Tuesday afternoon, just a regular Tuesday, the kind of day that feels like it has no history and leaves no mark. I was at my father's house, because he'd asked me to help him clean out the big walk-in closet in his bedroom. He said he was thinking of renovating, turning it into a proper dressing room, and he needed to clear out decades of accumulated stuff. It seemed like a simple, mundane task, a son helping his dad, nothing more. The closet was a time capsule, smelled of cedar and old wool on the top shelf, way in the back behind a stack of old blankets that felt coarse and heavy in my hands. My fingers brushed against cardboard, a box. It wasn't a fancy box, just a plain brown cardboard, one the kind you get from the post office. It was heavy. I had to use both hands to pull it forward, a cloud of dust puffing up. and making me cough. I remember thinking it was probably full of old bank statements, or maybe some of my mother's things he couldn't bear to part with after she passed, something sentimental, but ultimately ordinary. I carried it out into the light of the bedroom, and set it on the floor beside his bed. The tape that had once sealed it was brittle and yellowed, and it came away with a gentle pull. The lid lifted off easily, and inside it wasn't papers, not exactly. It was a stack of envelopes, maybe 2 dozen of them, all bundled together with a faded green ribbon. They were all the same kind of envelope, a creamy heavy paper, and they were all addressed to my father, but it was the handwriting on the front of the top envelope that made my breath catch in my throat. I knew that handwriting. It was my daughter's, the loops of the LS, the sharp, precise way she crossed her T's. I'd seen it on birthday cards, on notes left on the fridge. But the date on the postmark, it was from 7 years ago. The year, everything fell apart. My throat went dry, a coldness started in my chest, and spread outwards. This was wrong. She hadn't spoken to him in years. She'd cut him out of her life completely. And when I'd tried to understand why her answers were always vague, full of a pain, she wouldn't share with me. She said he'd changed, that he'd become cold, that he didn't approve of her life. And I believed her. I thought it was a generational gap, a stubbornness on both sides. I never imagined there were letters, a correspondence, a secret history I knew nothing about. Marionette, and the strings were my own desperate need for everything to look perfect. My hands were trembling. As I untied the ribbon, it felt flimsy, like it would disintegrate. The first envelope was on top. I slid the letter out. The paper was the same creamy quality as the envelope, and there it was in her unmistakable hand. Dear Grandpa. It began. I remember the sun was coming through the window, falling across the page, and the words seemed to burn themselves into my eyes. She was writing about her first semester at college. She was excited. She was telling him about her classes, about a professor she admired. It was warm, it was loving. Then about halfway down the page she mentioned me. She said she'd had a fight with me, a big one, about her choice of major. I remembered that fight. I thought it was just the two of us. It was heated. I said things I regretted later. I told her she was throwing her future away on an impractical dream. She was so angry she didn't speak to me. Weak. But in the letter she was recounting the fight to my father, and she wrote, Dad was just so angry, he said some terrible things. But I know he doesn't mean it. He's just worried. I wish he could see how happy this makes me. It was a normal, forgiving thing for a young woman to say. It was healthy. Then I read my father's reply. It was written on a separate sheet, tucked behind her letter. His tight, precise script was a stark contrast to hers. His letter didn't start with Dear Ella, it started with I am not surprised to hear about your father's outburst. He went on, he wrote about my temper. He said it was a family flaw, something he'd endured from his own father, and had seen emerge in me. He said I was incapable of supporting her dreams, because I was secretly jealous of her courage. He said my anger wasn't about worry, it was about control. He painted a picture of me as a small, bitter man who couldn't stand to see his daughter succeed. Where he had failed, he validated her pain, but he twisted its source. He made me the villain, and he positioned himself as her only true. I felt dizzy. I had to sit down on the edge of the bed. This was one letter, one fight. Maybe it was a fluke, maybe he was just trying to make her feel better in a clumsy way. So I went to the next envelope, and the next. I read them all. I couldn't stop. It was like watching a car crash in slow motion. My hands were shaking so badly. The papers rattled. The room was completely silent, except for that sound, and the frantic beating of my own heart. The letters spanned 2 years. Every time she reached out to him, confiding in him about a problem, a doubt, a conflict with me, he was there. But he wasn't comforting, he was poisoning. He took every minor disagreement, every normal father-daughter conflict, and he reframed it. He weaponized it. My frustration after a long day became a deep-seated resentment toward her. My concerns about her safety were reinterpreted as a lack of faith in her judgment. My attempts to set boundaries were depicted as attempts to dominate her life. He was constructing a narrative brick by brick, letter by letter. He was building a wall between us, and I had been on the other side, completely oblivious, wondering why the mortar was setting so fast, why she was pulling away. I remembered all those moments with a horrible, aching clarity. The time she came home for Thanksgiving, tense and quiet. I thought she was just stressed with school. But according to a letter from that October, she had written to him about a phone call Wed had where I'd questioned her about a new. I saw her through the crowd, my daughter Sarah. She was a vision in a deep blue dress, her smile luminous. But it was a lighthouse beam sweeping across the room, never landing on any one thing for too long, especially not on me. Her laughter would ring out. But it had a brittle quality to it, like glass about to crack. She was playing her part to the happy bride Tobe, and she was better at it than I was. For one impossible second the crowd shifted, and our eyes met from across the dance floor. It was just a flicker, a boyfriend in my mind. It was a concerned father asking about his daughter's life in his retelling to her. It was an interrogation, he told her. I didn't trust her to make her own choices. The betrayal was so immense it was almost physical. It was a cold weight in my stomach. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was a calculated long-term campaign. He had been listening to her with one ear and talking to her with a forked tongue. He saw the natural fissures that occur in any relationship, and he poured acid into them, widening them into canyons. The worst part was the final few letters. Her tone began to change. She started to push back a little. She wrote, "I don't think Dad means it that way, or that seems a little harsh." And his replies became colder, more insistent. He accused her of being blind to my manipulation. He said, if she couldn't see the truth, then perhaps she was as lost as I was. The last letter from her was short. It was just a few lines. She said she needed some space from the family to figure things out. And that was it. The correspondence ended. The silence that followed in that box was louder than any sound. That was the silence that had filled my life for the past 5 years. The estrangement I had blamed on our stubbornness, on my failures. As a father, on the simple passage of time. It had been engineered. It was a lie constructed in these creamy handwritten pages. I sat there for a long time. The sun moved across the floor. The dust motes danced in the light. The world had not changed, but my understanding of it had been shattered and reassembled into something monstrous. And knew every memory I had of those years was now tainted. Every painful moment with my daughter was recontextualized. The guilt I had carried for so long, the weight of believing I had driven her away with my own inadequacies, began to lift. But it was replaced by a white-hot rage, a pure terrifying anger toward the man in the other room, the man who was my father, who had methodically broken the most important relationship in my life. My first impulse was to storm out there, to wave the letters in his face, to scream at him, to demand to know why would he do this? What kind of sickness, what kind of jealousy could compel a grandfather to destroy his own granddaughter's relationship with her father? I could feel the energy coursing through me, my muscles tensed to spring up to confront him. But I didn't. I forced myself to breathe, to think this wasn't just about my anger. This was about my daughter. This was about the truth she had never been allowed to see. If I confronted him now, in a rage, he would deny it, he would twist it, he would find a way to make me look irrational. He had proven himself a master of manipulation. These letters were a key. They were the one thing that could unlock the prison he had built around her perception of me. But if I used them clumsily as a weapon, I might ruin everything. She might not believe me. She might think I had forged them. The shock might be too much. I had to be strategic. This was the most important moment of my life. I carefully, methodically retied the ribbon around the letters. I placed them back in the box. I didn't put the box back in the closet. I slid it under the bed. Just for now, I needed to process this. I needed to plan my next move with the cold, clear precision it deserved. I stood up. My legs felt weak, but my resolve was solid. The truth was no longer a hidden thing. It was in my possession. It was a burden, yes, a terrible, heavy connection that lasted less than a heartbeat. But in that tiny space of time, I saw it. Not anger, not yet. It was a question, a silent, pleading question, and I had nothing to offer it, no answer. So I looked away, first back to the safety of my champagne glass and the meaningless conversation. Burden, but it was also a tool. It was the one thing that could maybe, after all these years of silence and pain, bring my daughter back to me. The world was different now. The past was a lie. But the future was suddenly terrifyingly full of possibility. My world used to be so simple. It was built on a foundation I never thought to question. My dad was my hero. He was the one who understood me, who laughed with me, who made me feel like I was the most important person in his life. And my mom, she was the obstacle, the source of all the tension, the one who always said no, the one whose quiet disapproval felt like a constant chill in the I had the story memorized, a script I'd replay in my head. Whenever I felt a flicker of doubt, my dad was the wronged party. He was the fun, understanding parent who just wanted peace. And my mom was the one who caused all the conflict. She was too strict, too emotionally distant. She was the villain in our family's story. And I was the loyal sidekick to my dad. It was a black and white movie. and I knew exactly who to cheer for and who to boo. Choosing to live with him after the divorce felt like the only right choice. It was a declaration of loyalty. I remember refusing my mom's calls, letting them go to voicemail. While I sat with my dad watching a movie, I'd listen to his excuses for why our family fell apart though. She was impossible to talk to, how she'd shut down, how she never tried to understand him. I absorbed every word, building my identity around this certainty. It was comfortable, this clear division. It gave me a reason for all the anger I carried. It gave all the pain a single, easy target. The first crack was so small I almost missed it. We were talking about a family vacation we took years ago, back when things were still supposedly okay. He was telling a funny story about me learning to swim, but he mentioned a detail about the hotel pool that was wrong. I remembered it clearly because my mom had taken a picture of me there. I corrected him, just a casual thing. And he paused for a fraction of a second, his smile tightened, then he brushed it off, said his memory was fuzzy, and quickly changed the subject. It was a tiny thing, a loose thread on the sleeve of a perfect sweater, but I couldn't stop myself from pulling on it. The discovery happened in his garage. He'd asked me to find an old toolbox for him. I was moving boxes around, and one was mislabeled. Instead of Christmas decorations, it was full of old files and notebooks. I wasn't snooping, not really, I was just curious. And then I saw it tucked beneath a stack of tax documents, a bundle of letters held together with a brittle rubber band. The paper felt thin and dry in my hands. My first reaction was defensive on his behalf. This had to be a misunderstanding. Maybe they were love letters from before the divorce, something private I shouldn't be seeing. But the dates on them were recent, from the years after the split. I opened the first one with a nervous feeling in my stomach. It was written in my father's familiar handwriting. It was addressed to his sister, my Aunt Carol. I started to read, and my heart began to pound. It wasn't a loving letter, it was a strategy. He was detailing his plans, his approach with me. He wrote about how important it was to secure my allegiance. He talked about my mom, calling her unstable and prone to anger. He mentioned specific incidents, twisting them, framing her reasonable concerns as hysterical overreactions. I felt a hot flush of shame. This was a betrayal of her. But I was still trying to defend him in my mind. Maybe he was just. It was a stupid thing, I said, truly insignificant. One of her friends, a young woman with bright pink hair, was gushing about their honeymoon plans. Italy, I think it was. She turned to me beaming and said, "Isn't it romantic, Mr. Davies?" And I, wanting to sound fatherly and wise, nodded and said, "Oh, it's a big world, plenty of time for all that later. The important thing is building a stable foundation first." It was a line from a parenting magazine, empty, safe, hollow. Venting to his sister, maybe he was just hurt. But I kept reading. The letters spanned years. Each one was a calculated step. He documented conversations, Wedhead noting how he'd subtly guided my feelings. He'd plant a seed of doubt about my mom's new job, suggesting she cared more about her career than me. He'd reframe her attempts to set boundaries as her being controlling and cold. He fabricated stories. In one letter, he described a time my mom supposedly forgot to pick me up from school, leaving me waiting for an hour in the rain. I remembered that day. It was my dad who was late. My mom had actually called the school to check on me. He had taken her act of concern and rewritten it as neglect. The ground didn't just crumble beneath me, it vanished. I was falling through the air, and everything I knew was a lie. The narrative I had built my life on, the justification for my anger, the very foundation of my loyalty, it was all engineered. I wasn't a daughter making a choice. I was a pawn in a game I didn't know I was playing. My trust wasn't just broken, it had been systematically violated for years. The grief hit me like a physical blow. All those lost years with my mom, the birthdays she spent alone because I chose to be with him, the phone calls I dismissed, the hurt I must have caused her, all while believing I was on the right side. The weight of it was crushing. I confronted him that night. I walked into the living room with the bundle of letters in my hand. My voice was shaking, but it was steady. I asked him about the forgotten pickup. I quoted his own words back to him. At first he denied it. He said I was misinterpreting, that I was upsetting myself over nothing. But I stood my ground. I saw the panic in his eyes as he realized I had read everything. The denial turned to deflection, then to a quiet, terrible confession. He didn't say he was sorry for what he did to me. He said he was sorry I found the letters. He said he did it because he loved me, because he was afraid of losing me. And in that moment, I saw him not as my hero, but as a frightened, selfish man. The betrayal was complete. The person I trusted most had weaponized that trust against the other person who loved me. Leaving his house that night felt like an escape. I drove for hours just circling in the dark. The silence in the car screaming in my ears. I knew what I had to do. But the thought of facing my mom was terrifying. How could I even begin to apologize for years of believing a lie? How could I ask for forgiveness for my own complicity? I pulled over and picked up my phone. My hands were trembling so badly, I could barely type. I didn't call, I couldn't bear to hear her voice. Yet I wrote a text. It took me an hour to write 3 sentences. I said I was sorry. I said I had discovered something terrible about my dad. I said I finally understood what she must have been going through all these years. I pressed send, and felt like I was throwing a message in a bottle into a vast dark ocean. I didn't expect an answer. But her reply came almost immediately. It wasn't long. It didn't say I told you, so it didn't express anger. It just said I am here, I love you, can I call you? When her name appeared on my screen, and I heard her voice, all the walls I had built just collapsed. I sobbed into the phone, words tumbling out in a messy, incoherent flood. I told her about the letters, I told her about the lies. And she just listened. She cried with me. There was no triumph in her voice, only a deep shared pain for the first. I saw the change happen in slow motion. Sarah had been listening. The polite public mask she'd been wearing all night just dissolved. It didn't crack, it melted away, revealing something raw and terrifyingly honest underneath. The smile vanished from her eyes. First, then her lips. The air around us seemed to get still even though the party roared on. We were on the same side of the glass wall that had separated us for so long. Rebuilding our relationship is a slow process. It's not a fairy tale ending where everything is instantly fixed. There's awkwardness. There are moments of sadness for the time we lost. We're learning how to talk to each other without the shadow of my father's narrative looming over us. It's difficult and messy, but it's real. It's based on truth, not manipulation. I finally understand that forgiveness isn't a single event. It's a path I am walking every day. Forgiving my mom for the distance I helped create, forgiving myself for being so blind, and maybe someday finding a way to forgive my father for his weakness, not for what he did, but for the flawed human being he is. Seeing my parents as people with all their flaws and failures. That's the hardest part of growing up. The black and white world is gone, but what's left in all its complicated, painful color is finally real. I never wanted to be the villain in my own daughter's story, but that's the role my ex-husband David wrote for me. It was a part he crafted with such meticulous care, feeding her the lines scene by scene, until I was nothing but a monster lurking in the margins of her life. He built a fortress of lies around her. And for years, I was locked out, watching from a distance, as the ghost of the mother I used to be was systematically destroyed. His motivation was simple, and in its own way pathetic. It wasn't enough for him to have left. He needed to be right. He needed to be the hero, the long-suffering saint who had escaped a terrible situation. His ego was a fragile thing, and my mere existence, my continued love for our daughter Chloe, was a silent accusation. So he set out to prove that his leaving wasn't an abandonment, but a rescue mission. He needed Chloe to believe she needed rescuing from me. It started so subtly, I almost missed it. A small comment here, a confidential talk there. He'd pull her aside after a visit, his voice low and concerned. You seem a little tense, sweetheart. Was your mom, was she okay today? She seemed on edge. He'd plant a tiny seed of doubt about my stability, if I was tired from work, and maybe a little short. He'd reframe it as me being emotionally volatile if I had to cancel a plan because I was genuinely sick. He'd sigh and tell her it's a shame she couldn't prioritize you again. He was a master of taking the ordinary, messy stuff of life and twisting it into evidence of my fundamental failure as a mother. He created a secret world with her, a club of 2, where I was the outsider. He'd have these little dad-daughter chats where he'd share his worries about me. He painted a picture of me as someone who was unloving, cold, and incapable of real connection. He'd say things like, your mother, she just doesn't understand love the way we do, she's built different. He turned our divorce, which was painful but relatively civil on the surface, into a grand saga where he was the noble knight and I was the dragon. He'd slain. He never yelled, he never made grand accusations. He just dripped his poison, one carefully chosen word at a time, until the well of my daughter's trust in me was contaminated. She took a small step toward me. The noise of the party, laughter, the music, the clatter of plates, it all seemed to pull back like a tide, going out, leaving just the 2 of us on a silent shore. Her voice When she spoke, had a tremor in it, a vibration of pure feeling. But it was firm, it was the firmest thing I'd ever heard. Her eyes were bright glassy, with tears she was absolutely refusing to let fall. Watching it happen was a special kind of torture. It was like standing on the shore watching your child drift out to sea on a raft of lies. And you can't swim out to her, because the water is infested with sharks. He's convinced her. Are there? I'd see the change in her eyes during our visits. The easy laughter faded. First, then came the questioning looks, the subtle flinch. If I moved too quickly, as if she expected me to hit her scream, I didn't know what horrific fantasy he'd sold her. I was fighting an invisible enemy. How do you defend yourself against a threat you can't see? Every time I tried to talk to her to ask what was wrong, she'd just shut down. Nothing's wrong, Mom. She was parroting his lines, building the walls he had designed brick by brick. The impact was a slow, suffocating death of our relationship. Our weekends together became a minefield. The air was so thick with unspoken accusations, you could choke on it. We'd sit in silence at dinner. The only sound, the clinking of forks. Sometimes she'd lob a harsh word at me, something that felt rehearsed, something that sounded exactly like David, you're so selfish. She'd say, if I asked her to turn off her phone, you just want to control everything. They were his words in her mouth. I'd look at her, this beautiful girl I'd read stories to, whose knees I'd bandaged, and I'd see a stranger who had been taught to hate me. He, of course, was reveling in his victory. When he'd drop her off, there was this smug satisfaction in his eyes, a little smirk that said, see, she's mine. Chloe's loyalty to him was absolute. She saw him as her protector, her sole source of truth in a world where I was the unreliable narrator. He had won. He was the favorite parent, the hero, the only one who understood her. I fell into a deep despair. There were months where I just gave up. What was the point of fighting a ghost? I started to accept that I had lost my daughter, that the connection we had was gone, forever replaced by this fictional version of me that David had created. I tried to mourn her and move on, to build a life that didn't revolve around the weekly heartbreak of her visits. But I couldn't let go completely. In a box under my bed, I kept a few mementos, a lock of her baby hair, a Mother's Day card she made me in kindergarten, a tiny sweater she used to wear sometimes. I'd write her letters I knew I could never send. I'd pour my heart out onto the page, telling her the truth, telling her how much I loved her. Then I'd fold the paper and hide it away. It was a fragile thread, but I clung to it. It was all I had. The unraveling didn't happen with a bang. It happened with a whisper. Chloe was 17. She was changing, becoming her own person, questioning things she had always accepted as gospel. The catalyst was something so small, so trivial, that David must have forgotten it even existed. Chloe was at his house, looking for a screwdriver to fix a loose hinge on her jewelry box. She went into the garage to his old tool chest, and tucked away underneath a tray of socket wrenches, she found a small faded blue notebook. It was my journal from the first year after the divorce. She told me later that she almost didn't open it. She thought it would be full of the venom and bitterness her father had always described. But curiosity got the better of her. What she found wasn't anger. It was grief. It was page after page of my raw, unedited pain, my longing for her, my confusion over why she was pulling away, my desperate attempts to understand what I had done wrong, entries about sitting outside her school, just to catch a glimpse of her descriptions of the silent car rides home. And then she said it. The words didn't slice, they were too precise, for that they were more like a surgeon's scalpel, cutting directly to the disease. You're just a cowardly fool. After a visit where I would cry so hard I had to pull over, there were no accusations against David, just a mother's heart broken and laid bare on the page. She confronted him with it. She walked into the living room holding the little blue book, and asked him, her voice shaking, what it was. I can only imagine the panic that must have flash frozen his face. He stumbled. He tried to snatch it away. That's private, Chloe, your mother's. She's not well, she writes lies. But his reaction was too sharp, too defensive. It was the reaction of a man caught in a trap of his own making. He started sputtering more lies, trying to explain why he had hidden it, why he had kept this evidence of my instability locked away. But with every new lie, he only hammered another nail into the coffin of his own credibility. That was her moment of clarity, she told me. She looked at him, really looked at him. And for the first time she didn't see her hero. She saw a scared man scrambling to maintain a fiction. She saw the manipulation not as a protective shield, but as a cage he had built around her, the image of him, her infallible father, shattered into a million pieces right there on the garage's concrete floor. The shift was instantaneous, and absolute. The fortress walls crumbled, and she turned away from him toward the truth she had finally found. She showed up at my door that night. Her face was pale, streaked with tears, and she was clutching the blue journal to her chest. She didn't say anything at first, she just fell into my arms sobbing. We sank to the floor in the hallway, and held each other. The conversation that followed was the most painful and beautiful of my life. It was full of tears, yes, a river of them. There were apologies from her, which I instantly brushed away. It wasn't her fault, I told her, that over and over there were apologies from me for not fighting harder, for not finding a way to break through. But mostly, there was understanding, a long, deep, overdue understanding that washed over us. Both we talked for hours, unraveling the knots he had tied, comparing our memories, seeing the past 10 years, with horrifying new clarity. The consequences for David were swift and total. He lost her, not just her presence, but her trust, her respect, her belief in him. The narrative he had spent a decade constructing was exposed as a flimsy house of cards. His phone calls went unanswered. His attempts to explain himself were met with a quiet, firm rejection. The victory he had been so smug about was revealed to be a hollow, temporary thing. This wasn't about revenge for me, it was about vindication. It was the validation of a pain I had carried alone for so long. The world finally shifted back onto its axis. The truth, which had been buried for so long, was no longer a quiet, desperate hope under my bed. It was alive, sitting right next to me on the couch, holding my hand. What we have now is a new beginning. Our relationship is different, it's stronger, more honest. It's a bond that has been tested in the hottest fire and survived. We talk about everything. We're making up for lost time. The shadow of the lie is gone, and in its place is a light that feels earned. He tried to erase me from her story, but he only succeeded in making our reunion that much more powerful. The ordeal didn't break us, it forged us into something unbreakable.